Hello everyone, Silent K here. We have more cards to review, but before that, a quick correction from last video. Oh deal. Oh deal, oh deal, oh deal. Oh deal. Oh deal. Oh deal. Alright, that should make up for any misplays last episode. So let's get into the new cards. First up for Bloodcraft, Lethal Blade. 3 mana spell, choose an enemy follower. Whenever this follower attacks, it will deal 3 damage to itself. If Vengeance is active for you, give this effect to all enemy followers instead. So this is kind of like a Breath of the Salamander, but it activates on Vengeance instead of Enhance. So on the plus side, you still pay 3 mana even for the bigger effect, but on the minus side, your opponent does have some control over keeping you out of Vengeance. Unlike Dragoncraft though, Bloodcraft has a lot of removal options, so this one's pretty mediocre by comparison. It would probably be worth a -1, but it might see some play over Demonic Storm in a zoo heavy meta where you just want to clear the board and you don't want to take any damage of your own. So overall, 0. Next, Carabosse, Wicked Fairy. Legendary, 6 mana 6/6. Fanfare, for the remainder of this match you will not gain a play point at the start of your turn. For the remainder of this match, draw a card and deal 1 damage to the enemy leader at the end of your turn. These effects will continue even if this follower leaves the area. Alright, lore-wise, you should all know Carabosse, though you're forgiven if you don't know her by name. In most versions of her story, she's not named, and in the most well-known version, she goes by a different name. So you may know her better by her Disney name, which is Maleficent. Yep, Carabosse is the Wicked Fairy Godmother from Sleeping Beauty. And just like her fairy tale counterpart, she comes with a curse. On the minus side, your play points get capped at whatever turn you play this on. So if you play this on turn 6, you'll be capped at 6 mana for the rest of the game. If you play it on turn 8, you'll be capped at 8 mana for the rest of the game. And if you play it on turn 10 or later, there is no downside to this card. The effects also stack, so if you play 2 Carabosses, you're getting 3 cards and 2 pings every single turn. And even though the drawback for this card is way too big for a control deck, it is an insane set of effects for an aggro deck. Normally very aggressive decks cap off at 6 or 7 mana, and they really need a lot of fuel to keep going, and usually by the end of the game they just need a few more damage to finish off their opponent. So for an aggro deck, the downside of this card isn't that big, and the benefits are extremely huge. The most interesting part of this card is that it's a 6 mana card for an aggro deck that doesn't offer a lot of immediate burst damage. Normally very aggressive decks top off their mana curve with powerful storm followers like Imp Lancer or Soul Dominator. This card will keep an aggro deck going, but it won't finish off the opponent quickly. So I really like the design. This card will definitely see some play. Overall, +2. Onto Dragoncraft, Master of Draconic Arts, 3 mana 1/4, Ward. Clash, gain +4/+0 until the end of the turn if Overflow is active for you. This card has a bit better trading value when evolved than Rahab, and it costs 1 less mana. But on the minus side, it's much less aggressive since the buff doesn't activate when you hit face, and it's not a great card when played on curve. Unless you're playing against an aggressive deck that runs a lot of 1/1s and 2/1s, then this isn't really going to do anything on turn 3. So overall, -1. Elder Tortoise, 4 mana 2/4, Fanfare, recover 1 evolution point if Overflow is active for you. On the plus side, Evo recovery followers are usually pretty fantastic. You do often have to use the evolve right away though, and in the late game this guy doesn't really offer much evolve value. When you compare it to other recovery evolve followers like Crystalia Aaron, Luminous Mage, or Olivia, not quite as good. Overall, 0. Next, Tilting at Windmills, 7 mana amulet. Whenever you play a neutral follower, give it Storm and destroy it at the end of your turn. This is aptly named for a card that grants Storm. Actually, the name comes from an English idiom, which means attacking imaginary enemies, and the word tilting in this sense is just another word for jousting, hence the card art. The phrase is derived from the story of Don Quixote, where at one point Don Quixote himself attacks a field of windmills after mistaking them for giants. So, carrot machine gun, anyone? At the high end, this also works well with Servant of Darkness from Call of Cocytus, Israfil, Prince of Darkness, Lucifer, and interestingly enough, Angel Crusher is one of the cheapest high attack followers you can give Storm to with this. It's an interesting card. It doesn't really do anything better than a class-based Dragoncraft deck can do. But if you're going for a dragon flavored neutralcraft deck, I can definitely see a deck being built around it. Overall, +1. On to Forestcraft. Elf Twins Assault. 2 mana spell, deal X damage to 2 random enemy followers. X equals the number of neutral cards in your hand. In a neutralcraft deck, this card is absolutely insane in the early and mid game. You're going to have at least a few cards in your hand, and it's going to do a ton of damage to 2 followers. Typically it's going to wipe out whatever's on the board. It is pretty bad if you're top decking, but any reasonable sized hand is going to give you way more than 2 mana's worth of damage. Do note that this is worded differently than Dragon Newt Fist. This card can hit 2 targets once, but it can't hit 1 target twice. But overall, an extremely potent card, +2. Next, Abby the Axe Girl, 2 mana 2/2, Clash, gain +2/+0 until the end of the turn. If you're lucky, this can trade up better than most 2-drops, but other than that, it's very unremarkable. There are a lot of better cards to play. Overall, -1. On to Havencraft, White Tiger, 3 mana 3/2, Ward. Can't be targeted by enemy spells and effects. The card text is pretty good, the stat distribution, not so much. He's kind of on par with Maisy, and Maisy does see some play. Not bad in an aggressive deck. Overall, 0. Next, Lion of the Golden City, Legendary, 7 mana 5/5, Fanfare, put an amulet that costs 5 play points or less from your hand into play, then destroy that amulet. Whenever an allied neutral follower comes into play, subtract 1 from this card's cost. Now, this lion is not a reference to the Wizard of Oz, but with this we can say the expansion has plenty of
lions and tigers and bears, oh my!
This card is actually not completely terrible in a normal Haven deck. It's not really good enough to run, but it's not completely terrible. It is mainly a neutralcraft card though, and in a neutralcraft deck it's pretty decent if you can get a few cost reductions on it. Aside from countdown amulets, this also has decent synergy with Frozen Mammoth. Overall, +1. On to Runecraft, Wizardess of Oz, Legendary, 5 mana 4/5, Fanfare, draw cards until there are 5 cards in your hand, change the cost of spells without spell boost in your hand to 1, last words, at the end of your next turn, banish all spells in your hand. Now this one obviously is a reference to the Wizard of Oz. I do like the story, but I've never really explored it outside of the Julie Garland film, so I don't really have any stories about it. At one point, American McGee was tossing around the idea of a twisted steampunk Wizard of Oz game, along the same lines as his Alice games, but the Kickstarter failed, so they never went into production. If you look around, you can find some really cool concept art and a trailer though. As for the card, I'm not really sure what you can do with it. It can grant you some tempo if you have some spells to play it with, but it seems very inconsistent in whether or not you even draw cards to begin with, whether you draw cards you can use, and it also doesn't really have any big impact combo potential since all of the expensive Runecraft spells are either spell boost or they're just plain bad. This card might be okay if it had last words at the end of your next turn, banish all spells in your hand, but as it is, you can't even play it on curve. You have to wait until turn 6 or 7, and then play it, and then play your 1-cost spells, and then your opponent's going to kill it, and you're going to lose all your spells at the start of your next turn. So if you can't play your spells right away, then you're going to lose them. This could be alright in an aggressive follower-based deck, where you use the card draw just to fuel your hand, and then maybe you get some extra tempo with spells. But we already have a card that does that pretty well. It's called Daria. It was at the top of the meta for a while. So overall, I'm going to have to give this a -1 for now. If some synergy comes out, which gives it some big combo potential, then it could be a lot better. But right now it just seems like a worse Daria, which is pretty much what I said about Word Wheeler Ginger. Right now though, it doesn't seem so great. On to Shadowcraft. Haunted House, 1 mana amulet, countdown 3, whenever an allied follower, excluding ghosts, is destroyed during your turn, summon a ghost. This does have kind of clunky anti-synergy with Prince Catacomb decks. It takes up a spot on your board when you're trying to build a big board for Ektar, and then you buff everything with Prince, so when things die they summon a skeleton, and then you don't have room for a ghost. And really Prince decks just want sticky followers, so that they're still around when Ektar comes down to get buffs. It does offer a little additional burst for Phantom Howl aggro decks, but you don't really see any more of those. It's mostly just Prince decks at the moment. And this card alone isn't really strong enough to change that balance. Overall, -1. Next, Usher of Styx, 2 mana 2/2, Necromancy 6. Put one of your highest cost followers that has been destroyed this match into your hand. So it's Rise of the Dead on a stick, but it comes with a rather high Necromancy cost. Prince decks do generate a lot of shadows, so you might be able to combo this on turn 9 with a free Ektar if you played one previously. And Nephthys decks could combo this on turn 10 for a free Nephthys or Mordecai. And even though Nephthys decks don't generate a lot of shadows, they do tend to have a few after dropping Nephthys once. And she doesn't really mess up Nephthys synergy, since you always run 2 drops in Nephthys, and they don't necessarily have any Nephthys synergy. Ultimately though, those combos aren't really very strong, so I don't think she quite makes the cut in any of those decks. So I'm going to have to give her an overall -1. Onto Swordcraft, Council of Card Knights. 5 mana spell, summon a Club Soldier, a Heart Guardian, and a Spade Raider. And a Club Soldier is a 3 mana 1/3 with Storm, a Heart Guardian is a 3 mana 1/3 with Ward, and a Spade Raider is a 3 mana 1/3 with Bane. Also note that all the tokens are neutral, not Swordcraft. So I had to check if these guys were actually a reference to Alice in Wonderland card guards in Rage of Bahamut, or whether Cygames just repurposed them since they had card suit motifs on them. They are definitely card guard references though. They were released during an Alice event, their flavor text mentions the Queen of Hearts many times, and in their evolved forms, Club Soldier and Spade Raider are in very flamboyantly colored rose gardens suitable for Wonderland. As for the card itself, in a normal deck, it does offer a lot of options for evolving. You can evolve the Storm if you need to, the Bane, the Ward, depending on the situation at hand. At 5 mana though, it does have some really strong competition with cards like Albert and Luminous Mage, so I don't see it making the cut in a normal Swordcraft deck, and the score would suffer for that. But this card does have a lot of neutralcraft synergy, even though you can't buff the tokens with Alice unless they're already on the board when you drop her. And in the neutralcraft deck, its main competition is Goblin Princess. This card offers more flexibility in evolving, but Goblin Princess's main benefit is that she generates a strong undercosted card when she dies, so you don't lose any card advantage when you play her. She can also catch hand buffs from Alice. In a neutralcraft Zoo deck, you might have room for both, but if you can only run one, I think Goblin Princess has a slight edge. It's very close though. So for a neutralcraft deck, I'll give it an overall score of 0. Next, Maisy, Red Riding Hood, 2 mana 2/2, evolve, destroy an enemy follower if an allied neutral follower is in play. In my fairy tale collection, after Alice in Wonderland, Red Riding Hood is the story I have the most amount of stuff for. American McGee also had a game with a Red Riding Hood theme by the name of Akaniro. It wasn't exactly like an Alice twisted Red Riding Hood game. It was more or less just an action game with a Red Riding Hood motif, but it got shut down. It's unfortunate his studio was pretty bad at everything aside from Alice, because they did really like the fairy tale themes. There's also a little indie game called The Path that I spent a lot of time on. Most people would find it pretty boring, but I thought it was kind of cool. As for the card, in many cases this will be better than a Sledgehammer Exorcist, since it's 1 less mana and it gets the normal +2/+2 buff. And at 2 mana it can easily be comboed during the evolve turns, so you don't need to bank on a follower sticking around from the previous turn. An extremely efficient card, overall +2. Onto the neutrals. Ephemera, Angelic Slacker, 4 mana 1/3, ambush. Whenever another allied follower attacks, give that follower +1/+0 until the end of the turn. She has a bit of an Alice aesthetic about her, but she is an original character in Rage of Bahamut. She has a lot of different cards in that game, and most of them have to do with her being a lazy, useless angel. And as for the card text is pretty decent, but those raw stats, really bad. This is pretty terribly statted for a 4 mana card. Ephemera needs to stop slacking off and hit the gym. Neutralcraft already has a lot of buffing anyway, so this doesn't make the cut. Overall, -1. And the last card for today, Into the Looking Glass, 2 mana spell, draw a card. Change all cards in your hand and in play that cost 7 play points or less into neutral cards. The name of this card is obviously a reference to the second Alice book titled Through the Looking Glass. I couldn't find the card in the Rage of Bahamut database though, and the artwork seems to be unrelated to Alice in Wonderland. As for the card, it's kinda hard to rate right now. It might have some decent combo potential in the future, but as of right now it doesn't really have anything to work with. In a neutralcraft deck, you normally run mostly neutral cards anyway, so you're not going to run this just to turn the handful of cards that aren't neutralcraft into neutral cards. You also wouldn't add this to a normal class-based deck, along with some powerful cards like Elf Twins Assault, just to try to get a lot of value out of that, because it would be very inconsistent. Your neutralcraft cards wouldn't have any power whatsoever until you drew into the Looking Glass. So for a deck like that, it would have to be like really late game combo potential. You could say it has potential with tilting at Windmills, but Dragon already has a lot of access to big storm followers. So there's nothing you can really do with that combo that you can't do with just a normal Dragoncraft deck. This card will probably have to be reassessed in the future if strong synergy cards are revealed, but for right now, it seems pretty underwhelming. So overall, -2. And that's it for today. I know a lot of cards were very recently revealed on PC Gamer and Twitter. I was already wrapping up this video when they were revealed, so they couldn't make it into this one. Instead of waiting until the weekend though, I'll get started on the next video right away, so there should be another video this week. That way we don't have to wait an entire week for cards that just came out. So look forward to that. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, and tune in again next time.